Well, Chris obviously was a very, very powerful player, you know. I mean, he could run and, you know, he'd run all day for you. You know, he did a lot of running for me, I suppose, in them days. But, you know, I mean, to sum him up really is that if we had a corner and the ball come across, and he'd go where I maybe not would have gone, you know. I mean, he'd go in with people and he'd dive in and head the ball and get cuts and stitches, and, you know, and he'd come off the post and I'd roll it in. But you see, I would get the recognition because I put it in the net. But I mean, he was a very powerful runner, a very, very brave player. One of the best players I've ever seen as a centre forward. I don't think there'll ever be another one like him at Hull City. When I came to Hull, as I say, when we played away, we always stayed together, and you know, I don't know why I slept with him all that while really, because he snored a hell of a lot. And funny enough, when we, as I say, when we went away, we never, very rarely we discussed the opposition. And no, we got on very well from the beginning, I think. I mean, it just happens, doesn't it? It's just one of those things where I came, and I think my debut was against Exeter City. I think Chris flicked the ball on and I scored, and it was ever from that day. And obviously when you're together in the gym morning and afternoon, it just, you know, people can't say what happens. I mean, it's like other partnerships that have gone on in football. It just happened like that. Got the ball. So I remember one day we was in the gym and was practicing a free kick from like 40 yards out on the right, and we'd been doing it for about an hour till we got it right. Then all of a sudden we heard somebody going around the gym going, woo, 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 and Cliff's hat come on. He said, what's going on? He said, Chillo said, well, all I am for this team is a decoy. And, you know, that was the sort of player he was. He would do that continuously, Chris.
As Ken and Chris would be the first to admit, Hull City was a team in the true sense of the word, and they wouldn't have been so successful but for the help of their teammates. Andy, you came all the way down from Scotland to join Hull City, but how did that move come about all those years ago?
Well, it happened through my brother, actually. My brother played with Hull City in 1946, just after the club reopened, after the Second World War. And he brought me down for a trial in February of 47, and that's how the move come about. I signed in 47.
I mean, Andy Davidson was Hull City, wasn't he, in those days? I mean, I know even prior to Ken and Ian and the other Ken out and coming to the club, I mean, I was just a youngster in those early years, and Andy was the guy he was like the father figure, and he looked after us, and Andy was so determined. I mean, to be quite honest, you dared not give 100% when you played football, because Andy would see through you, and he wasn't shy about letting people know at the half-time period or even after the game. But that was total commitment by Andy Davidson. And if you wanted to learn from his ideals of the game, Andy wasn't a cultured player. He'll be the first one to admit that. But as a captain and as a motivator and as a guy who led by example, there was second to none.
Ken and Chris were such good players with a good reputation. It was inevitable that other players might go after them in games, and I think this happened on more than one occasion.
Yes, which was quite common in the game in those days. The star players have always had to get. And to be honest, being the senior player of the club, the only way I could help them out was to take the same action against opposition. And I used to say to the opposite players, if it happens to our front runners, it'll happen to yours. So you better tell your central defenders to leave them alone, or there'll be casualties at this end. And usually a quiet word had the effect that was desired, without having to do anything about it.
Were there any instances though when things did cut up a bit rough?
Yes, there was in one particular occasion. It just come in the side of the lad Chris, and the centre half was being more than naughty. He was abusing the lad, to be quite honest. Perhaps I shouldn't have done it, but I had to take action on that occasion. I wasn't proud of it, but I had to stop the lad being abused, to be quite honest. And I did take action.
The other two major signings made by Cliff Britton to complete that magical Hull forward line were Ken Houghton and Ian Butler. Ken, one of your greatest footballing pals was Ian Butler, and you played together at Rotherham United, so it was no surprise really when Butler joined Hull City that you should follow him very soon afterwards.
I think it was a surprise in a way, because I think we'd both been very happy at Rotherham, and we had a very good side there. And I thought we might, at that particular time, I think in 1961, when we both got into the side, I thought we could get promotion to the First Division, but a good side. But it didn't materialise over the period, because you start selling players, bringing players in, and it didn't materialise. But I thought the 1964-65 season, we had a great chance. And I think really what upset myself and Ian Butler at the time is that Rotherham had promised that they didn't want us to go, and then really behind us backs we were sold to Hull City. But in a way that turned out to be a blessing in disguise. I can't really speak for Ian, but I know Ian was very happy at Hull City. But for myself, it was great, you know.
So the move to Boothray Park then was a move that you weren't particularly bothered about at the time?
Oh, no,
you came straight out of the blue.
Well, I was a Rotherham lad, very happy to play with them. Magic crowd, real family club, magic. And I got a phone call one Tuesday night from Danny Williams, who was the manager at the time, and said that Cliff Britton of Hull City wanted to speak to me. I mean, to be fair, I knew Cliff Britton, I knew Hull City, but I thought, well, what do they want to speak to me about? And it took me through the Wednesday morning, and I spoke to Cliff Britton for about 3/4 of an hour, and he convinced me that Hull City were going places.
Ken Houghton, a great schemer.
Yes, when they bought Ken, I never met Ken, and he was getting on a bit in years, I think, when he came to Hull City. I think he was about 34, I think. But Ken was the passer of the ball, he was, he could pass the ball 40 or 50 yards, and he was so direct, and as I say, he was that was his asset. His main asset was his passing of the ball, and obviously he was one of the hardest shots I ever saw as well, Ken. He could hit a ball and hit it through, and he scored quite a lot of goals. As I say, he was a very powerful striker of the ball. I remember playing at Norwich, and the ball came out about 25 yards out, and he hit it on the volley, and before Kevin Keelan moved, the ball was back at the halfway line. And that's how hard he could hit them.
Cliff Britton was in charge at Boothray Park during that successful period of the 60s, and he had his own unique style of management.
I mean, when Chris was captain of Hull City, we got a bit fed up, so we sent him in one day, said to get us a rise, you see. So it was about 11 o'clock, and at 5 o'clock he hadn't come out. So when he come out, we said to Chris, have we got a rise? He said, I don't know. He said, Cliff got his table tennis board, whatever they call them, the tiddlywink board out, and he was talking to him about football all afternoon. We were sat there 4 hours. So we never bothered. I mean, that's the sort of man he was. As soon as you go in, he'd have a board with red and green tiddlywinks, and he'd have us playing moves, and so we just forgot about it.
Yeah, Cliff Britton actually his authority and his ruling of the situation within the ground from the management side is probably expressed as well by the chairman at that time, Mr. Howard Needler. Even had to have permission to come into the dressing room, and this was on Cliff's authority, and that showed the power of the man. But as far as from Harold Needler's point of view, I mean, he was basically the instigator of Hull City at that time, because he put the money where his mouth was, and he was the guy who actually backed the buy-in of Ken Houghton and Ian Butler, and he gave Cliff that tremendous opportunity. I mean, and if it hadn't have been for Mr. Needler, then that would never have happened. And I even feel today that the involvement of the Needler family, even now, I know Mrs. Needler still is a staunch Hull City fan, plus the family, and they have been for, obviously, for a lot of years.
Let's rejoin Ken and Chris as they relive some of the more humorous moments from their time together at Hull City.
King's Cross Station. And it was like somebody had shouted that there was a bomb on the bus, because as soon as it pulled up in King's Cross, we would players would be shooting here, there and everywhere to go around the corner to the nearest pub to get a couple of pints down the neck, because we had a train journey home and we weren't allowed to drink. We could drink cold drinks, you know, but we weren't allowed any alcohol, you know, so. And even then, when we got back to Hull...
We weren't now. The train got back at 20 to 11.
No, 27 minutes past 10.
27 minutes past 10.
27 minutes past 10. And
I used
to have a mate of mine who had a little pub just in the town centre there. And I used to say, it's keeping open for us, you know what I mean? And there's be 4 of us jumping in a car.
We shouldn't be saying that.
And we'd fly around there.
Being a publican. We'd think of doing overtime.
But we would. We'd go and get a couple of beers, you know. And it was good news. There was the time, Ken, can you remember when we played at Derby and we played a night game? But Cliff Britton loved his food, you know, and he would, if he could organise a meal, he would organise a meal. I mean, and we always stayed at the best place. And on our way back from Derby, we stayed at this, and it was like a country club, you know, with all the oak panelled walls and everything. And of course, we weren't allowed to drink, you see. We weren't allowed to drink after the game. Soft drinks, yeah, but no alcohol. So we got into this country club, and it's one of those, there's sort of smoking rooms here, and there's this room there, and I said, right, come on, let's get in here. And we popped into this little room, closed the door.
There's a cellar, wasn't it?
Rang the bell, like, waiter comes. Could I have 4 pints, please? It was doubling up, like, I was paying, as usual.
Well, you're the only one with money, being the captain, weren't you?
So anyhow, we sat there, and we started gagging a little bit. The next thing, the door opens and you could hear it. And it was Cliff. Oh, and his face went red, white, blue, and he grimaced at us. And then he slammed the door
back.
And that was it. He left it at that until the next day after next, because we had the following day.
He must have been.
And then he
must have known you had a drink, didn't you? But I mean, you would have never thought he'd have found you in there, because
we were
he would only just get me and you into the door,
wouldn't
it? Right. He was very strict like that.
He was also very strict about the pitch as well, wasn't he? Apart from actually playing matches, you couldn't go on the pitch.
No, we weren't allowed on the pitch.
No, that was sacred, the pitch. You know.
I remember when Stan, the groundsman, God rest him, was a lovely man, wasn't he?
Yes.
Stan Combs. And we used to go on there, and Cliff come one Friday, he said, look, I've got permission. This is how Cliff was, you know. He said, I've got permission to go on the football ground. Because his players and his gym and his ground was his domain, but the football ground was Stan's. So he got permission to go on the ground this Friday dinner, and Stan was painting between the goalposts, and I heard him say, 5 minutes, Cliff, that's all you're having on the pitch, because I've got to mark the goal line. So he went for a cup of tea. He come back, and as he was walking down, we heard Stan shouting something. One of the lads had been and sat on his whitewash bucket. He had a bit of diarrhoea or something, and he'd filled the bucket up. Oh, and he went, Stan went bananas over it. And I think we weren't allowed on the pitch again for about another month.
That's right.
Characters, really.
Do you know, there's one little instance sticks with me about Ian Butler, because he'd said he'd stop smoking.
Oh, yeah, I remember.
I mean, and you say that, and every player in the dressing room, you know, oh, Buxy, stop smoking, like, you know, and he'll never keep that up, and they're having bets whether he'll stop and whether he won't stop. And we walk out the dressing room door, and there's Ian Butler with a cigarette on, puffing away at a fag. So everybody jumps on him. You know, so it's stopped. I've just lost money. He said, I have, but I'm just practising for when I start again.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
You know,
cost a lot of money in them
the
days.
sense of humour, him. I mean,
he's very dry though, Ian, wasn't he?
Oh, yeah. There's a real, you know, there's real characters among them. I mean, but there was also some hard fellas as well, you know. But the humour of it. I mean, I always used to take a bottle of beer away with me to away games on a Friday.
A bottle?
A bottle, yeah, just one or two.
I remember then days you used to have your own apprentice, didn't you?
Yeah, to lift my bag onto the coach.
One bloke used to be, and he used to, when we were going travelling, we always travelled on a Friday. Cliff loved to travel Friday. We stayed in the best hotels, didn't we?
Yeah.
We had the best food, he said. And I remember the ground staff lad carrying Chris's bag one day onto the bus. I think it was going away for 3 days. And he went to sling it onto the rack, and all these bottles were rattling, and Cliff looked up, he thought, what's in there? He said, oh, it's just some rubbing oils my mum sent for me.
Yeah, rubbing oils.
We was going away
full of beer.
Full of beer.
Full of beer.
We were going away for Christmas, yeah.
I think there was a friend of ours, and he's a friend of yours as well, and he said to me the difference in those days was that there was a great expectancy
Yes, that's
when
right.
the team played. And when the ball went into forward positions, there was a great and everybody, he said, people were just literally dragged up out the seats because of this expectancy.
Yeah.
He said, because we expected you to score every time you went up the field. And if the fella in front stood up expecting it, the fella behind him had to because he wanted to see.
Yeah.
And he said everybody in the stand used to literally stand up.
Yeah.
He said it might just be a corner kick. But he said they always expected that you were going to score. And he said at the end of 90 minutes, he said